Imagine giving your heart to someone, every secret, every vulnerability, every piece of you, only to hear them laugh in your face and say, "I needed a real man." Now, what would you do if, in that same breath, even your closest friends, the people you considered family, turned their backs on you? Tonight, you're going to hear a story that will test your idea of love, betrayal, and the kind of revenge that changes you forever. My name is Emily, I'm 34, and up until 6 months ago, I felt my life was settled. Not in a boring way, but in a comfortable, I've finally figured it out kind of way. I have a career I'm proud of in marketing, an apartment I love, and a routine that felt like a warm blanket. I've always been the dependable one. The fiercely loyal friend, the hardworking daughter, the girlfriend who remembers your coffee order and the anniversary of your dad's passing. I thought loyalty was a two-way street. I was wrong. My life revolved around two central pillars, my boyfriend Mark and my two best friends, Sarah and Ben. I'd known Sarah and Ben since college. We were the inseparable trio, the kind of friends who had their own language built from inside jokes and shared histories. We'd seen each other through terrible haircuts, devastating breakups, and career triumphs. They were my rocks. Then came Mark. He walked into my life like a character from a movie. He was a financial advisor, sharp-witted, confident, with a smile that could disarm a firing squad. He had this energy about him, this magnetic pull that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He pursued me relentlessly, with a charm that felt both old-fashioned and intoxicating. For 3 years, I believed I was the luckiest woman alive. He made me feel seen, cherished, or so I thought. Looking back, the signs were there. Of course they were. They always are, aren't they? They're like little red flags you mistake for confetti, little moments you explain away because the alternative is too terrifying to consider. There was the way he'd talk to waitresses, leaning in just a little too close, his hand lingering on the table near theirs for a second too long. He'd call it networking or just being friendly. I'd feel a small, ugly knot tighten in my stomach, but I'd push it down. I refused to be the jealous, insecure girlfriend. "You have an incredible smile, you know that?" he said to the waitress. "It completely lights up this whole corner of the restaurant. I'm Mark, by the way." "Oh, thank you," she blushed. "Can I get you all anything else?" "We're good, thank you," I said, forcing a smile. I remember looking over at Sarah and Ben, expecting a shared eye roll, a subtle look that said, "Okay, he's laying it on a bit thick." But that's not what I got. "God, Mark, you could charm a statue," Sarah laughed after the waitress left. "Em, you better keep this one on a tight leash." She said it like a compliment. Ben just chuckled, shaking his head with an impressed grin. "Seriously, man, you've got the magic touch. I need you to teach me your ways." They weren't being protective of me. They were impressed by him. They were fans. My loyalty to them made me believe their judgment was sound. If they thought he was just a charismatic guy, then maybe that's all it was. Maybe I was the one who was overthinking it. It's amazing, the lies we tell ourselves to keep the peace, to keep the perfect picture from cracking. The cracks started getting bigger, though. He'd have late nights at the office that coincided with him coming home smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine. His phone, which used to be left casually on the kitchen counter, was now permanently attached to his hand, screen down. When I'd ask who he was texting so furiously, he'd just laugh it off. "Just a client, babe, panicking about the market. You know how it is." I did know, or at least I knew the version of the story he wanted me to know. The truth is, when you build your life around someone, admitting that the foundation is rotten means you have to tear the whole thing down, and I wasn't ready for that. The moment it all began to truly unravel wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, mundane. I was doing laundry, sorting through the week's clothes. His, mine, a tangled mess of our shared life. I picked up one of his work shirts, a crisp white button-down, and there it was, on the collar, right where a head would rest on a shoulder, a smear of dark red lipstick. It wasn't my shade. I haven't worn red lipstick since my goth phase in 2007. My heart didn't just drop, it felt like it evaporated. In that moment, the entire room went silent. The hum of the dryer faded away. The city noise outside my window disappeared. It was just me, the shirt, and the undeniable proof. It was the kind of cliché you see in movies, the kind you swear would never happen to you. I stood there for a long time, the fabric clutched in my hand. My first instinct was to rationalize. Maybe he hugged a female colleague. Maybe it was an accident. But my gut, that deep, primal part of me that I had been silencing for months, screamed at me. It screamed that this wasn't an accident. This was a confirmation. I folded the shirt carefully, placed it on top of the clean laundry pile, and waited for him to come home. I felt strangely calm, the kind of terrifying calm that comes after the panic has burned itself out. I had the lipstick, I had the proof. I thought that was the worst of it. I thought a simple act of infidelity was the deepest the betrayal could go. But what I was about to discover made a lipstick stain look innocent. He walked in an hour later, whistling, dropping his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door with the easy carelessness of a man with no secrets. He leaned in to kiss me, but I turned my head so his lips met my cheek. He pulled back, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Tough day?
My voice came out steadier than I expected. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I walked over to the laundry basket and held up the shirt. You missed a spot. He looked at the red smear on the collar, and for a split second, I saw it. Panic, the flash of a cornered animal. But then it was gone, replaced by something far, far worse. Annoyance, boredom even. He sighed, a heavy, put-upon sound, as if I were the one inconveniencing him. Oh, that? Yeah, I have been meaning to talk to you about that. He walked past me into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and pulled out a bottle of water. He took a long, slow drink before turning to face me, leaning against the counter as if we were discussing what to have for dinner. The casualness of it was a physical blow. You've been meaning to talk to me about cheating on me, Mark? And then he did it, the thing that shattered everything. He smirked. It wasn't a smile. It was a cold, cruel twisting of his lips. It was condescending, triumphant. It was the smirk of someone who had just won a game I didn't even know I was playing. Yeah, I cheated. So what? Let's be honest, Emily. This whole thing, it was getting a little stale, wasn't it? This boring little life, the quiet nights in, your obsession with spreadsheets and saving for a future that sounds like a prison sentence. I needed something more. I needed a real man's life, not this beige life with you. A real man's life? The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Every sacrifice I'd made, every time I supported his career over mine, every quiet act of love and partnership, he had just called it beige. He said it all with that smirk plastered on his face, like it was a joke, like my pain was the punchline. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I was falling, and there was nothing to hold on to. My first call wasn't to my mom or my sister, it was to Sarah, then Ben. I needed my rocks. I needed my people. I called them on a three-way call, my voice breaking as I recounted the conversation, the lipstick, the smirk. I expected outrage. I expected them to be on their way over with wine and rage and promises to help me burn his things. Instead, I was met with a long, uncomfortable silence. Wow, that's a lot, Sarah said hesitantly. Are you sure you're not overreacting a little? Overreacting? My world had just been detonated, and she was asking if I was overreacting? What? Sarah, did you hear what I said? He admitted it. He smirked at me. Look, Em, Ben cleared his throat. We all know Mark's, he's a big personality. And, I mean, to be fair, you can be a little controlling sometimes with the budgeting, the schedules. Yeah, Ben's right, Sarah added. Maybe he just felt suffocated. Maybe he just needed a release. I'm not saying it was right, but I can kind of see where he's coming from. Maybe he deserves someone who's a bit more spontaneous. It was like being stabbed twice.
The first wound from Mark was still bleeding, and now my two best friends were twisting the knife. They weren't defending me, they were defending him. They were making excuses for him. They were analyzing my flaws, listing my shortcomings as justification for his betrayal. The conversation devolved from there. They told me I needed to look at the bigger picture, that all guys get tempted, and that maybe this was the wake-up call I needed to be a more fun girlfriend. Each word was a fresh wave of nausea. These were the people who held my hair back when I was sick, who helped me move apartments in the pouring rain, who I trusted with the darkest parts of my soul. And they were siding with my betrayer. Let me ask you something. If your friends, your inner circle, took your partner's side after a betrayal like that, would you ever be able to forgive them? Or would you cut them off forever? I hung up the phone. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I was hollowed out. The grief was so immense, it had no sound. It wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the end of my friendships. It was the end of my belief in the people I loved. I had lost everyone in the span of an hour. That night, I sat alone in the dark, the city lights twinkling outside my window like distant, mocking stars. I opened my phone and scrolled through my camera roll. Thousands of photos. Mark, Sarah, Ben, me, us at the beach, us at Christmas, us on a rooftop bar, smiling so wide we looked like fools. A gallery of lies, a museum of a life that was never real. With a final, shuddering breath, I hit select all, and then the trash can icon. A pop-up asked, delete 4,128 items. I pressed delete. The days that followed were a blur of gray. Mark was gone, having packed a bag that night and left without another word. The silence in the apartment was deafening. It was a heavy, suffocating thing, filled with the ghosts of laughter and conversations that now felt like a violation. Sleep became a stranger. I'd lie awake for hours staring at the ceiling, replaying that smirk, replaying Sarah and Ben's clinical dissection of my personality. When I did sleep, it was fitful, plagued by nightmares. I started drinking wine alone, not for the taste, but for the fuzzy numbness it offered, a temporary buffer between me and the jagged edges of my reality. I'd pour a glass at 6 p.m., then another, until the bottle was empty, and the pain was just a dull, distant ache. I'd walk for hours through the city streets with no destination, my headphones blasting music to drown out the voice in my head that kept asking, why? Why was I not enough? Why did they all abandon me? It wasn't just losing him, it was losing them. The pain wasn't singular, it was a chorus. Betrayal multiplies when it comes from every angle. It poisons everything. My phone remained silent. No calls from Sarah or Ben. No, "Are you okay?" texts. The only communication I got was indirect, and it was brutal. A few days after the implosion, I was mindlessly scrolling through social media when I saw a photo Sarah had posted. It was the four of them: Sarah, Ben, Mark, and Mark's new person, a bubbly blonde I didn't recognize. They were all at our favorite brunch spot, raising mimosa glasses, smiling for the camera. The caption read, "So good to be with people who are all about living life to the fullest. #good vibes only."
It was a targeted missile. It was a public declaration of their allegiance. They hadn't just chosen his side, they were celebrating it. Then came the group chats. I was still technically in a few of our larger mutual friend group chats, and they must have forgotten, or more likely, they just didn't care. Reading those words felt like drinking acid. They were rewriting our history, painting me as a villain to absolve themselves of their own treachery. They were taking my pain and turning it into gossip, entertainment for their brunch table. For one dark, desperate moment, I was tempted. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over Mark's contact. I thought about begging. I thought about apologizing for being too controlling, for not being fun enough. I thought about swallowing every last shard of my pride just to make the loneliness stop. I craved the familiar, even if the familiar was poison. But as I looked at his name on the screen, that smirk flashed in my mind's eye. Cold, arrogant, and dismissive. And something inside me hardened. No, I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. I wouldn't give any of them that power over me again. I threw my phone onto the couch, my hands shaking with a mixture of grief and a tiny, flickering ember of rage. I decided to just exist, to go to work, come home, and try to breathe. The apartment was still half full of his things, a constant, painful reminder. One night, fueled by cheap wine and sheer despair, I started packing it all up. His stupid video games, his expensive sneakers, the books he pretended to read. I was stuffing a box with his sweatshirts when a small, leather-bound journal fell out. It wasn't a diary, it was a ledger. He meticulously tracked his finances. I almost threw it in the box, but a flicker of morbid curiosity made me open it. As I was about to close it, my phone, which had been a source of nothing but pain, buzzed on the counter. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize, an unsaved contact. You don't know the whole truth about Mark or your friends. My blood ran cold. It had to be a prank. Maybe Sarah or Ben trying to mess with my head even more. I almost deleted it, but something in the simple, direct tone of the message felt different. It didn't feel like a taunt. It felt like a warning or an invitation. After a long hesitation, my fingers trembling, I typed back a single word. "Who is this?" The reply was almost instant. "My name is Sophie. I think we need to talk. Can you meet?" We met the next day at a sterile, anonymous coffee shop halfway across town. I picked a table in the corner, my back to the wall, my nerves screaming. I had no idea what to expect. Was she a friend of his? A family member? Then a woman walked in, scanned the room, and her eyes landed on me. Her face was a mixture of anxiety and determination. It was the blonde from Sarah's Instagram photo, Tiffany. Her real name was Sophie. She sat down, her hands wrapped tightly around her purse. She looked just as terrified as I felt. "Thank you for meeting me. I know this is insane. You're the woman he's with now. The one from the picture?" "Yes," she said, her eyes filled with regret. "But that's not the whole story. Mark and I, we've been together for over a year." A year. The word punched the air out of my lungs. Not a one-night stand, not a recent fling. A year-long, parallel relationship. He had been living a complete double life. While I was planning our future, he was living a second one with her. "You knew about me?" "Not at first, but when I found out, Mark told me you were his crazy ex. He said you were obsessed with him, that you wouldn't let go. He showed me texts from you, normal texts like, 'Don't forget to pick up milk,' and he'd spin them saying you were tracking his every move. He said you were emotionally unstable and he was scared to leave you. He made me feel sorry for him." It was diabolical. He hadn't just cheated. He had meticulously crafted two separate realities, painting each of us as the villain in the other's story. He was pitting women against each other, using our empathy and trust as weapons against us. He had made her see me as a threat, and he had made me, well, I didn't even know she existed. Think about it for a second. Have you ever been tricked into hating the wrong person? Fed a story that made you see an enemy where there was actually another victim? Sophie pulled out her phone, her hands shaking. He told me you two broke up months ago, but that you kept harassing him. He said your friends, Sarah and Ben, were trying to help him handle you. He said they were worried about your mental state. My friends? They weren't just complicit, they were active participants in his lie. They were helping him manage his affair. The brunch photo suddenly made a sickening kind of sense. It wasn't just a celebration of his new freedom, it was a calculated move to solidify his story to Sophie, to show her that everyone, even my own friends, was on their side. We sat there for 2 hours in that coffee shop, two strangers connected by the same lie. We took out our phones and started comparing notes. It was like piecing together a psychological thriller. The web of deceit was breathtaking in its complexity. The late nights at the office were dinners with her. The business trips were weekends away with her. The lies were constant, seamless, and utterly remorseless. We uncovered a year of overlapping anniversaries, holidays, and promises. He was a master puppeteer, and we had all been his marionettes. As we were about to leave, the anger and grief swirling between us, Sophie's face went pale. There's something else. The reason I finally had to contact you, it's about money. He was always talking about his big investments, but he was also always short on cash. He'd borrow money from me, small amounts at first, then bigger. A few weeks ago, he told me about this amazing investment opportunity he got you in on, a joint savings account for a down payment on a house. He said you put in $60,000. He asked me to match it, to prove I was as committed as you had been. I stared at her, my mind refusing to process the words. A joint savings account? A house? We had a joint account, yes. It was my inheritance from my grandmother, my nest egg, the money I had been saving my entire adult life. Sophie, I didn't put that money in for a house. That was my account. He was just supposed to be on it for emergencies. Sophie's eyes widened in horror as the final, devastating piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Emily, he told me he was moving that money into a high-yield fund last week. He had you sign some papers, right? For the transfer? I remembered. About a month ago, he'd come home with a stack of documents, talking a mile a minute about market volatility and protecting my assets. He said it was just a simple transfer to a safer account with his firm. I trusted him. I signed where he told me to sign without a second thought. I had just signed away my future? He hadn't just broken my heart, he had robbed me blind. I practically ran home from the coffee shop, my heart hammering against my ribs with a terror so profound it felt like I was drowning on dry land. I tore through my office, searching for my laptop, my hands clumsy, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I logged into my online banking portal, the little blue circle spinning for what felt like an eternity, and then the page loaded. The balance of my high-yield savings account, the account that held 34 years of careful planning, of skipped vacations and disciplined saving, the money my grandmother left me, was $17.38. $60,000. Gone. A single wire transfer dated last Tuesday to an account I didn't recognize. The rage came then. It wasn't a slow burn, it was a flash fire, a supernova of fury that consumed every ounce of grief and sadness and left behind something white-hot and terrifying. It was the kind of anger that makes you understand how ordinary people can be capable of extraordinary destruction. But then, another piece of Sophie's story slammed into me. The gifts. The vacations. She'd mentioned Mark had taken Sarah and Ben on a weekend trip to a vineyard a few months back, saying he'd closed a huge deal. He bought Sarah a designer handbag for her birthday, one I knew she'd been coveting for years. He'd covered the deposit for Ben's new apartment. Where did I think that money was coming from?
He was a financial advisor, yes, but not a millionaire. The truth hit me with the force of a physical impact. It was my money, my inheritance. He was stealing from me, bit by bit, and using it to buy the loyalty of my best friends. They weren't just covering for his affair, they were on his payroll. Their friendship, their allegiance, had been purchased with my stolen future. This wasn't just a betrayal within a betrayal. This was a conspiracy. And then, as quickly as it came, the screaming stopped. I pushed myself up, my body aching, my throat raw. I walked to the mirror and looked at myself. The tear-streaked, heartbroken woman who had been staring back at me for weeks was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize. Her eyes were not filled with tears. They were cold, clear, and calculating. The part of me that loved them, that grieved for them, had been burned away in the fire. All that was left was steel. If they want to betray me together, if they want to profit from my pain as a team, then I'll bring them all down together. I walked over to my desk, pulled out a fresh notebook and a black pen. The page was clean, white, and full of possibility. At the top, I wrote a title: Project Nightingale. A nightingale is a bird that sings beautifully in the dark. I was about to make them all sing. I wrote the first name in the notebook in sharp, precise letters: Mark. Underneath it, I wrote Sarah. Then Ben. I underlined each name twice. The next day, I called Sophie. My voice was different. The victim was gone. He stole it all, Sophie. Everything. And he used it to buy my friends. But I have a plan. The question is, are you in? There was no hesitation on her end. She had lost money too, but more than that, she had lost a year of her life to his lies. She was just as hungry for justice as I was. We were two women who should have been rivals turned into allies by the architect of our own misery. Our plan was simple, and it preyed on Mark's two greatest weaknesses: his greed and his monumental ego. He thought he was the smartest man in every room. We were about to build a room he couldn't think his way out of. Sophie had a cousin who worked in tech, a quiet genius who owed her a favor. He helped us create a ghost company. We built a slick, professional website for a bogus investment firm called Apex Global Ventures. We created a fake portfolio showcasing impossible returns, specializing in offshore, high-risk, high-reward cryptocurrency startups. It looked exclusive, cutting-edge, and just slightly shady enough to be irresistible to a man like Mark. Then, we set the bait. Sophie went back to Mark, pretending to be heartbroken, but ultimately forgiving. She played the part of the woman who just couldn't quit him. She told him she was done being his secret and wanted to build a real future, a future with real wealth. Mark, I was talking to my cousin, the one who works in Silicon Valley. He told me about this private fund, Apex.
It's invite only, but the returns are insane. He said he could get us in, but the minimum buy-in is huge, like 50,000. If we could pool our money, this could be it. This could be our ticket out. He took the bait so fast it was almost comical. We had recorded every call, every conversation. His voice was filled with a smug, predatory excitement. He saw a quick score, a way to multiply the money he'd stolen from me and the money he was about to con out of Sophie. Send me the link. I'll do my own due diligence, of course, but it sounds promising. If the numbers check out, I'm in. We'll be rich, baby. So rich your little friend Emily's nest egg will look like pocket change. He laughed, a deep, arrogant sound that made my blood boil. The entire time, I was the one feeding Sophie the lines, sitting next to her with the script we'd written, coaching her on how to sound convincing. He once said I wasn't enough of a woman. Let's see if he's enough of a man to survive this. The trap was set. We created a secure portal for the wire transfer. Mark, believing he was a financial genius about to pull off the ultimate heist, didn't just wire the 50,000 he'd promised Sophie. He got greedy. He liquidated other assets. He convinced Ben to go in with him on the deal of a lifetime. In total, he wired over $110,000 into the ghost account. The moment the transfer confirmation hit our inbox, Sophie's cousin immediately rerouted the funds through a dozen different crypto wallets before depositing the full amount into a secure, anonymous trust account in my name. The money was gone, untraceable. Mark's digital footprint led to a company that had never existed, run by people who were nothing but lines of code. He had just wired his entire net worth, including more of my stolen money and my ex-best friend's savings, into oblivion. He checked his account, saw the money was gone, and sat back smiling, thinking his ship had finally come in. He had no idea. The real trap, the one designed not for his wallet, but for his entire world, hadn't even sprung yet. Phase 2 began 24 hours later. At 9 a.m. on a Wednesday, we launched the attack. It wasn't one bomb, it was a coordinated, multi-front carpet bombing of his entire life. Sophie and I had spent days compiling the evidence into neat, digestible packages. The audio recordings of him bragging about his cons, the screenshots of his text to both of us, laid out side by side to show the overlapping timelines. The bank statements showing the withdrawals from my account, the forged transfer documents. We had everything. First, the friend group. I created a new group chat. I added Sarah, Ben, and about 20 other mutual acquaintances. Then I added Mark. The first message I sent was a simple, clear audio file of Mark telling Sophie how he was playing me, calling me his boring little retirement plan. Before Sarah could spin it, I dropped the next bomb, the side-by-side screenshots of his texts, the I love yous sent to me and Sophie 5 minutes apart, the photo of my savings account balance at 0, followed immediately by the bank records of his lavish gifts to Sarah and Ben. Then Sophie joined the chat. Hi everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Sophie. I'm the other woman, or as it turns out, just another victim. Mark stole from me too. And for Sarah and Ben, who knew about me and helped him lie, I hope that handbag was worth it. The chat exploded. It was a digital bloodbath. People started firing off questions, accusations. Sarah and Ben tried to do damage control, typing frantic messages about me being unstable, about me faking the evidence, but it was too late. The proof was undeniable. The same friends who had silently condoned their behavior were now turning on them, horrified. Simultaneously, an anonymous email was sent to the Human Resources Department at Mark's financial firm. The email contained a detailed dossier on his activities, framing it as a pattern of behavior that constituted financial abuse and gross misconduct, making him a massive liability to the company. We attached the recording of him bragging about a can't-miss offshore investment, a clear violation of company policy. The final nail in the coffin was for his family. We sent a package to his very traditional, image-obsessed parents. It contained printouts of everything, along with a thoughtfully written letter from the perspective of 2 women who were worried about their son's criminal behavior. Within hours, his world was burning. The friends who had enabled him were now blocking him, sending me private messages, feigning ignorance and shock. Sarah and Ben were being digitally crucified by their own social circle. His phone, I can only imagine, was melting down. Let me ask you this. After all that, if those friends came crawling back to you, begging for forgiveness, would you give it to them, or would you let them drown with him? The climax came around 3 p.m. that afternoon. I was at my desk at work, trying to focus, when I heard a commotion in the lobby. It was Mark. He had stormed past security, his face purple with rage, his expensive suit rumpled. He was screaming my name. "Emily, you think you can ruin me, you psychotic bitch? You'll pay for this." He burst into my office area, his eyes wild and desperate. The man who had worn a smirk of cool confidence was gone. In his place was a pathetic, cornered animal lashing out in its death throes. My colleagues stared, frozen in shock. I just looked at him, my expression unreadable. I didn't feel fear. I felt nothing. He was just a loud, pathetic man who no longer had any power over me. Before he could take another step towards my desk, 2 large security guards grabbed him by the arms. He struggled, screaming threats and insults, a pathetic spectacle of a man completely undone.
As they dragged him out of the office,
Kicking and shouting, his eyes met mine one last time. There was no smirk now, just pure, unadulterated hatred and the terrifying realization that he had been completely and utterly outplayed. After security dragged Mark away, a strange quiet fell over the office. My boss quietly told me to take the rest of the day, maybe the rest of the week, off. I packed my bag, walked out of the building, and stepped into the afternoon sun. Sophie was waiting for me across the street. She had heard what happened. We didn't say anything. She just fell into step beside me, and we walked. We walked for miles, leaving the noise of the city and the wreckage of our pasts behind us. For the first time in months, the crushing weight on my chest was gone. I could breathe again. The air felt clean, fresh. There's a popular saying, living well is the best revenge. And I think that's probably true. Revenge doesn't heal the wounds. It doesn't erase the scars or give you back the time you lost. But sometimes it's not about healing. It's about justice. It's about taking the power back. Revenge doesn't fix the broken ground, but sometimes it levels it enough so you can finally start building again. The fallout was swift and total. Mark was fired, of course. His firm couldn't distance themselves from him fast enough. His parents, horrified by the scandal, cut him off completely. He was facing potential legal action from his former employer and was, for all intents and purposes, financially ruined. Sarah and Ben became social pariahs. The friends they had cultivated turned their backs, disgusted by their complicity. Last I heard, Sarah had to delete her social media, and Ben was looking for a new job after the story mysteriously made its way around his office. A few days later, as I was sitting in a park watching the world go by, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't have saved anymore, but I knew who it was. It was Sarah. The message preview was just visible on my lock screen. Em, I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was so stupid and so wrong. Can we please just talk? I swiped left and pressed delete without reading the rest. I put my phone back in my pocket. Sophie and I used the money, my money, to start over. She moved to a new city to be closer to her family. I signed a lease on a new apartment in a neighborhood I'd always wanted to live in. A place with no ghosts, no memories, a blank slate. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. I stood up and stepped out from the shade of a tree, walking confidently into the bright, warm sunlight. Betrayal cuts deep. It's a wound that can threaten to swallow you whole. But survival, and sometimes revenge, cuts deeper. It's the scar that reminds you that you fought back, and you won.